Welcome everyone to the June Entuity Tech Talk. I'm John Diamond and I'm the Product Manager at Entuity, and also with me today is my colleague Matt Tong, and he's a System Engineer at Entuity covering EMEA. We'll be your hosts for the next 30 or 40 minutes or so. Tech Talks, as most of you know, are designed for our customers and technical members of our authorized partner community. These sessions are recorded and are available on demand from the Entuity YouTube Center. They're a good resource for learning more about the product or reviewing features you may be interested in implementing. A few housekeeping items before we get into today's content. The call is on mute mode to eliminate any outside noise. Feel free to ask questions at any time via the chat panel. We will have time, I assure you, at the end to take questions that have been posted there. So, let's get started. Want to mention that we're going to be using Entuity 16.5, and we've got patch 1, which is the latest patch installed on our systems today. And by the way, if you have questions on this new release, please don't hesitate to contact your Entuity system engineer. We're more than happy to discuss the new contents, from the BMC dashboard integration to all of the other new enhancements that came out in patch 1, making monitoring your network more efficient and effective. So I'm going to just very briefly cover a couple of topics that are pivotal to the description and the worked examples, the use cases that Matt is going to take you through very shortly. What we're going to be talking about is integrating the event management system, the EMS, with the configuration management system. These are two functional blocks within Entuity. They're part of the base product. There's no additional licensing required. If you have Entuity, you have access to these modules if they've been enabled. Now, the event management system is described by this diagram that I've got on the screen at the moment, and basically takes in real-time events from multiple sources, many of which are derived at runtime via our SNMP polling. As metrics and status information is gathered by the SNMP polling operation, it is examined, and anomalies and interesting aspects are then converted into real-time events that are then forwarded through the system. That's not the only source of events. There are others, such as that based on our reachability probing, both layer 3 and layer 4. And you've also got other events being raised by SNMP traps, syslog events, and a multitude of other sources, including custom polling. All of these are normalized into the same data structure and then processed via the event management system. Firstly, they can be processed by a set of highly customizable rules and conditions. These can even generate new events, and those are fed back into the beginning of the pipe. The results of that are stored in the database for later review, and you can also do post-processing using a similar set of rules and conditions after that operation takes place. Now that's the processing of an event. I want to bring in a secondary concept, which is that of an incident, and there's a key and important difference between them. Many, in fact most of the attributes that you have associated with an event, like a timestamp, a severity, a source, a name, and all of that type of information are equally available in events and incidents. The key difference is that an event tells you that something of interest happened. It tells you when it happened, to what component, what it was that happened, further details, severity, and that type of information. What it doesn't tell you is whether or not that is still relevant now. There is no state associated with an event. It just tells you about something that happened at a given time in the history. The difference with an incident is that it's all about state. It has the other information, but it also maintains state as to whether that is still relevant or whether it has been closed out. So that's what incidents add on top of events, and you can also have multiple events feeding into the same incident. So that said, one of the things that you can do, whether it be through the event processing rules or within an incident via a mechanism called a trigger, which you'll hear a lot more about when Matt tells you the details in a moment, is you can call upon an action to take place if certain conditions are met. And that action will cause something to be done. And in this case, what we're introducing is a new capability that allows you to call upon a configuration management task to be implemented under the control of the event management system through the action. Now, a configuration management task could do many different things. We've provided some example configuration in the base product, and the sorts of things that you can do are shut a port down, enable a port, change a field such as the location field on a port, add a community string, and that type of operation which can be performed at the command line typically to devices that are under management. And that command line communication to achieve those results is all controlled via scripts that are highly customizable and extensible under the control of the configuration management system. So that said, what it means is that the event management system can now call upon things to be done to devices when and as it chooses. That's the intro. I'm going to pass the control over to Matt now, who is going to take you through some use cases that will explain why this is particularly useful. So Matt, I'm passing control over to you.
Thank you very much, JD. So yes, as JD said, so we're going to be running through a few use cases today of where we can make use of these two features in the Entuity product. We've got the event management system, we've got the configuration management system. What we're going to be talking about today is how we can get these two features of the product to work hand in hand to provide us automation so that we can have detection of issues or detection of something that we want to perform an action upon, and then to actually have that action carried out by the configuration management system. And the first use case that I'm going to be showing everybody today is the one that I brought up on this slide here. What we're going to be looking for is an interface that is continuously flapping. So in that its state is transitioning from down to up to down to up in rapid succession. If we determine that an interface is continuously flapping, a nice thing might be for the product to do is to switch that interface off or switch that interface into down. Okay, so this use case we're going to be looking for a continuously flapping interface, and if it's continuously flapping for more than a set period of time, we're going to automatically shut it down. Okay, so I've just launched my Entuity demonstration system into the event management system. So you might recognize this diagram at the bottom here from the slide JD was talking about beforehand. So the way that we can implement these configuration management tasks is as an action. So actions can be performed on events, they can be performed on incidents. The way that I have configured this use case today is on an incident. So I'm going to launch into my incidents tab, and here we'll see a list of all of the incidents that Entuity can raise. And within here, we have a standard incident called port status problem. This is the incident that will be raised in the event of an interface going down, transitioning into an operationally down state. But also this incident will raise if we determine that an interface is flapping. So flapping detection is automatic within the Entuity product. It's provided out of the box as a standard rule. And in a nutshell, what it's looking for is 2 port down events, 2 port up events within a 2-minute window. So rapid succession of that interface going up and down, we then determine that interface is flapping. So standard configuration, a port flapping event will raise a port status problem incident, as we're seeing here. Now, I could implement a trigger upon this incident. Okay, so a trigger is where we can implement an action to be performed on the state change of a particular incident. But what I wanted to avoid is if this port goes down as opposed to flapping, I didn't want then this interface to be administratively shut down. I only want my interface to be administratively shut down if my port is flapping. So the way I've achieved that is I've created a separate incident called port flapping, and this port flapping incident can only be opened via the port flapping event. So if we determine that our interface is flapping, we will get the port flapping incident. And this is the incident where we can implement the action or implement the shutdown task, as I mentioned in the use case. Other thing to mention is this incident can be closed by a port down or a port up. So once the interface stops flapping, if it rests in a down state or an up state, it's no longer flapping, in which case close the incident. So that's how I've configured this incident. I'll come back and describe a little bit more as we run through the use case about age out and expiry times. But for now, I'm going to show you the trigger. I've implemented a trigger on this incident called shut port, and I'll just describe very briefly what it's doing. On transition to opened, as the incident opens, we are going to delay for 60 seconds. Now this is to ensure that the interface is continuously flapping. We want to avoid a situation where the interface has flapped in the past and we shut it down anyway. So the reason I've implemented a delay here is so that we wait for 60 seconds so that we can determine whether this is something that's a continuous problem and the Entuity system needs to intervene. Perhaps in a production system you might want to increase that delay beyond 60 seconds, but for the purpose of today's demonstration, I've shortened that delay. Now the state after delay is going to be what state the incident is in after we've waited that 60 seconds. Okay, so we transition to open, we wait 60 seconds. If the incident is still in an open state after that 60 seconds, we're going to perform the action. And the action I've implemented is to run CM task, configuration management task, that's the function name, and I'll recap in the slide the actual syntax here. And then we put the configuration management task name inside of the brackets and quotes. So port down, that's my standard out-of-the-box provided configuration management task that will shut an interface down. So let's have a look at this. I'm going to launch in the interface itself, but before doing that, I've got a script on the Entuity server itself, which I won't explain how that's working for today's purposes. But simply what it's doing is it's sending port link down and port link up events, or SNMP traps more specifically, to the Entuity server so that we can simulate that this interface is flapping. So the first down has come in, and you would have just seen port status problem on my screen. And then we would have received a port up trap. And that has obviously closed my incident, which is why it's disappeared from my screen. We've had the second down come in now. So my port status problem, we haven't yet determined that there's been 4 state changes, which is the requirement for my port flapping rule to take place. But now it has. Now we have a port flapping incident as well as the port status problem. Now that's because I left port flapping as an opening event of the port status problem. So we see both of them in here. But while we're waiting for that 60-second delay, I'm going to jump back into the slides so that we're not sitting watching for 60 seconds. On this next slide, I've got a very high-level summary flowchart of what we're looking at here. So just to summarize again, we are detecting a port status change at the very top of this slide. We're then asking the Entuity system, is this interface flapping? And that's implemented with the flapping event rule, which I haven't shown in this demonstration. That's that standard out-of-the-box functionality. If we determine that this interface is flapping, then my port flapping incident raises, and that's when we get to the delay for 60 seconds after detection point here. It's where we have a 60-second pause, and that, remember, is to ensure that it's a recurring problem and that we need to intervene here. If the interface has flapped in the past and then 60 seconds later it stopped, then we don't need to intervene. So after that 60 seconds, we're then re-asking the question, is this interface still flapping? And that's determined by the fact that the incident is still in an open state after the 60-second period. If it's not, then we end at this point. We don't do anything. If the interface is still flapping, if that flapping incident is still open, then we want the system to shut down the port. So let's go back to my demonstration system. Again, JD, tell me if that's not appeared, but hopefully it has. So now what we're going to look for is whether that port down task has been executed, and it has. You can see 16 minutes past 5 server time, a port down task was executed by the system. And I can see that in my audit log, which is going to record all of my configuration management tasks, as well as other actions in the product. But specifically for today's demo, we're just looking at configuration management tasks in here. Also, you would see that task being executed in the history of my configuration management system. So again, I see port down, and the important part is I see status succeeded. So it was initiated and it was successful. So this port should now be in an administratively down state. And if we go into the port, we can see that it is. It's been put into a blue state, admin down, so it's not operationally down, which would, if it wasn't an operationally down, administratively up state, we would expect to see a red banner across the top. But because it's been administratively shut down, we're seeing the blue admin down. Okay, so just before I move off this this demonstration, I'll just explain a little bit more about the incident that I've implemented. I said I'd come back and explain the age out and expiry at the bottom. Now, the reason that I've left these blank and I've left them set to none is because my incident trigger here is being triggered, if you like, on transition to open. We then delay for 60 seconds. So at the point where this port flapping incident opens, we're waiting for 60 seconds. We're starting a 60-second timer. And then after that 60 seconds has occurred, we're looking at the state of that incident after the delay. And if it's still open, then we shut down the port. If my incident were to open, so we've got an interface that's flapping, let's say sometime between or inside of that delay window, the interface stops flapping and then starts flapping again. That timer we initiated at the state transition would still be running. And it would mean that my interface wouldn't particularly have been continuously flapping the whole time, but this trigger would still have been executed because my state after that 60-second timer would have still been open. So the way that I've got around this is I've placed an expiry time of 0 on here, which is to say that if my interface stops flapping, this incident will close, this incident will expire. So it will almost be removed from memory of a product. You can still go back and see it, but what it means is that when the incident reopens, or if it were to reopen, it starts a brand new incident. And that timer I've mentioned, the 60-second timer, starts new. So we start a brand new timer. So a couple of little tricks here. So to determine whether this has been continuously flapping, we make sure that if it stops, the incident expires. And that's done by just leaving the expiry time set to none. And of course, to determine whether it's continuously flapping, we're placing that delay of 60 seconds, which, like I said, you would probably want to have a bit higher in a production system. Okay, so I'm going to jump back to the slides. And this slide is just to recap the configuration management task as an action. So the thing that I'll show you on the next use case is that when you actually implement a configuration management task as an action, the action type you need to choose is Groovy script. And don't be scared by the big blank box that appears. There's a big input box there for you to place in a script. But for actually running a configuration management task, it's a very simple one line of code, and you can copy and paste it from these slides. These slides will be sent out after the call today. So the capitalization of the function name is important. Run CM task. What you place inside of the brackets and quotes, you can get from a configuration management menu within the Entuity product. So in my case, in that use case I just ran through, it was port down, port space down inside of those quotes. Okay, so the next use case I'm just going to touch on is consider where you have a policy that every running configuration should or needs to be saved to the startup configuration on your network devices. So Entuity can be configured to retrieve running and startup configurations from devices. Using our configuration management tool, we can also implement or push out that the running configuration is copied to the startup configuration. So with these two features of the product, we can create a scenario where we are looking for a difference between the startup and the running configurations. If we notice that somebody has made a change to the running and not written that to memory, not saved it to the startup, then we can use configuration management to automatically perform that action, copy running to startup. So we're monitoring configurations. We've got a couple of different methods of determining when we should pull the latest configuration. One is called change-based retrieval. Change-based retrieval is going to be polling a metric on the device that tells us when the configuration was last changed. So this will be the fastest method of pulling in configurations as soon as they've been changed. We will know when the configuration has last been changed. As soon as we notice it has, we ask for that configuration. We pull in the running and startup straight away. The other method is nightly retrieval, which is where we're just grabbing the configurations once a night at midnight, regardless of whether we know there's been a change or not. Every night we're just asking for the new configurations and saving it if there's been a change. So the best way to carry out this use case, or the best way to cover this off, is using change-based retrieval, in my opinion. It's going to be the fastest way to obtain the configurations after a change. Again, with the port flapping example we've just run through, you could implement a delay, and that would be implemented in the same way inside of the incident trigger, with a delay on transition to open. For the purpose of this, I haven't done that, and I'll show you my trigger now when we jump back into the product. But if we notice there's been an unsaved configuration change, Entuity raises an incident. We can then perform an action to copy running to startup, and that's a standard out-of-the-box configuration management task. So I'm just going to share my screen again, and I'm going to jump back to this Sydney router. I'm not going to run this one live. This is something that I performed yesterday, and I can show you what happened when I ran through this yesterday. The reason I'm not running it live is that it can take a couple of minutes for configurations to be received, and in the interest of time, I'm just going to show you what happened when I ran through this use case yesterday. At 11:55 yesterday, I made a change to the running configuration of this device, and Entuity automatically pulled those two configurations in. And by comparing the two of them, we can see that there was an addition of a community string, a read-only community string of Tech Talk, added to the running configuration, but it does not exist in the startup configuration. At this point, upon receiving these two configurations, Entuity would have raised an event to let us know there's been an unsaved configuration change. This is where I've implemented, again on an incident trigger, the incident's called CM unsaved configuration, and I have a trigger which in its current form is going to be actioned upon immediately after a transition to open. So there's no delay on here, but there could be if you wanted there to be. My action step is run CM task, copy running config to startup config. And just again, that's a standard out-of-the-box configuration management task. Okay, so to add this action step in, we hit the add. We've then got we've got a number of different action types that we can choose from. The one we want to use here is a Groovy script. Like I say, a big blank box appears, but all we need to do is just paste in that function name that I've put in the slides for you, which is run, capital CM, capital T for task, then the brackets and the quotes and the task name inside of that. And there it is. So 11:55 yesterday, we received 2 configurations from a device. The running was different to the startup. If I go into my audit log again, I can see that shortly after 11:55 yesterday, 11:56, so within seconds after, Entuity executed the copy running config to startup config. And that was done immediately because I didn't have a delay on the incident trigger. Now going back to my device on the configuration tab, I can see that the next configuration that we then pulled a couple of minutes later, if I look at them, that community string has now been saved. So these configurations are now identical. Okay, so one more thing to mention on this. I've implemented it quite simply at the moment. It's working on every device in the system. It's working immediately. Like I say, we could put a delay upon this incident trigger, but with triggers, you can also place conditions on them. So it might be that in a production environment, or perhaps if you just want to test this, you might want to put a condition on here so that this only applies to particular devices. So one idea might be to put a condition on here, a view membership test. My tool only has 2 views, but if I perhaps had another view for a particular office location or a particular subset of devices, I could implement a view membership test that would then only apply this trigger if my device is within a particular view, and then it's going to copy run config to startup in the event of an unsafe change, just for those devices that conform to my condition. Okay, so coming back to the slides, the very last use case I'm going to touch on quickly is another idea that we had, and I haven't implemented this for demo purposes, but it's just a concept idea of testing whether you can reach the command line of a device in the event of a network outage. So assume a scenario where you have a network outage event raised on a device. Entuity cannot reach that device with ICMP. But that's not to say we can't log on to that device on the command line. We haven't tested that at that stage. So what I've done here is I've implemented a number of rules which, in the event of receiving a network outage, Entuity will automatically test whether or not you can log on to the command line from the Entuity server, because that's where the logon is going to be initiated from. On the left-hand side of this slide, I've implemented an event rule which, in the event of receiving a network outage event on a device, so my condition is that we receive a network outage, event type, network outage. My action is to execute run CM task, test access. So the name of the task I'm running here is test access. That's not a standard out-of-the-box task. That's something I've added myself, but it's a very simple one. On the right-hand side of this slide, you can see my test access task. If you go to your configuration management system, hit the add button, you can choose from a number of out-of-the-box steps. So tasks are built from steps. 2 steps that you'll be provided with out of the box are login and log out. To test the access to a device, that's all I need to do. I just want to be able to log into the device and then log out of the device. So that's what I've implemented, my test access task, login, log out. So again, I receive a network outage event, I'm executing login, log out. But the way that we actually obtain some sort of intelligence from that is with event rules thereafter. So when you implement event rules, the order in which they exist in the tree is going to be the order in which they are executed. So the rule I have on the last slide will be first. These two will exist after that. So on the left, I've got a detection for if we are not able to get to the command line of this device. And the way I've implemented that is by looking at the config management job failed event. So across the top of this slide, this is what will show if my test access task failed for any reason. So we try to log on to the device and we can't. Entuity will automatically raise a config management job failed. So my event rule then should probably look for that event. And that's what I've done here. I've built a condition. My tests are to look for config management job failed. Also, have a look inside the reason of that incident, because that's where we're going to place the task name which has failed. So in my case, it's test access. I'm looking for the words test access inside of a reason of that. If we see both of those, if we see config management job failed and it's the test access job that has failed, we then move on to the event set detection. I've implemented this rule as an event set detection type. The next thing we're going to look for is, have you seen a network outage event on this device within the last 60 seconds? If so, then I want to raise a new event, and my new event is CLI inaccessible. So if we see a config management job failed incident where it matches test access and we've seen a network outage in the last 60 seconds, I'm going to raise a brand new event, CLI inaccessible. So the administrator of the tool, the engineer using the Entuity tool, at this point would see a network outage alert and also the CLI inaccessible alert. So they would know from that point that they can't log onto the device from the Entuity system. On the right-hand side is the opposite. Rather than looking for the job failed incident, we're looking for the job succeeded event. Again, we're looking for whether the reason matches test access. If we've also seen a network outage in the last 60 seconds, raise a new event. But this time, I want it to say CLI accessible. I can access the command line. Okay, so that was just another idea. So that's it from me in terms of running through some of the use cases. So I'll hand back to Pat at this point to see if we've had any questions.
Yep, we have quite a few actually. And the first one is, how would this work with FDX or stack switches?
Provided you have command line access into those devices that can be automated through the configuration management system, then I see no real difference. Fundamentally, the idea here is that based on detecting certain conditions via the event management system, you can then kick off a configuration management operation to do something. And so the real issue here would be whether or not you could actually do what you want to via the configuration management system, and typically that's via the command line. I don't have specific information about those technologies. That would probably need to be taken offline. If whoever submitted that question wants to follow up with us, then do please feel free to do so.
And then relative to that question, he's asking, and would this write to the start config or just the run config?
The example that Matt showed of handling a situation where an unsaved configuration has been detected, if that's the one that we're talking about, the operation that he called upon was copying the running configuration into the saved configuration. So that would be updating the saved configuration to match the running configuration. If there were other operations that were performed that only implemented a change on the running configuration, such as shutting a port down, then it may well be that you would want to extend that to save the change into the save configuration, but that would be up to you as to how that was implemented.
Okay, thanks, JD. And then, which vendors' OSs will this work with, and how will it determine which command sets to use?
Okay, that is a good question, because sometimes there are syntactical differences between different models of device, different technologies, and the way that can be handled is if you actually take a look in the one of the script steps. In fact, Matt, do you want to bring up the syntax on the screen at the moment for the login step? Within the configuration management system, as Matt showed, each task is made up of a number of steps. And if you take a look at the syntax of the standard login, you'll see that it actually does a test on what type of equipment it is that it's working with. The initial test there is checking to see whether it is Cisco, so whether the vendor is 9. You could go further and check specific models. You could also put further tests in to detect what version you're dealing with, if there is a particular aspect of syntax that has to be handled differently on different versions. Fundamentally, that syntax is open for change. It's available for change and customization, and can be pretty much as sophisticated as you want, and so that you can make a detection potentially at this point where you log in and save it in a variable, a determination as to what type of equipment it is you're dealing with, which would influence further on in other steps that can reference that same variable, what they're going to have to do differently based upon the type of equipment you just logged into. Okay, Pat, do we have anything else?
Yep. And then, can you show us how you would schedule configuration management jobs? For example, setting up a daily job to retrieve running config on a device.
Okay, Matt, do you want to go over that one again?
Sure, I can show that one. So there are two different parts to scheduling configuration tasks within Entuity. One of these will be to retrieve configurations, which I think is what the question was alluding to, retrieving configurations from devices. So within a device, I mentioned before about the change-based retrieval as opposed to the nightly retrieval. Now that actually is something that you can configure on the configuration tab of a device. You can see my general info section at the bottom here. If I edit, I can either choose change-based retrieval, which is what I suggested for that demonstration or that use case where we were saving the running config to the startup. But if you wanted to just schedule a nightly retrieval, which will pull the configuration every night at midnight, then you can turn this off and you can turn on nightly retrieval. Looking outside of just retrieving configurations, any configuration management task can be scheduled. So I go to Administration, Configuration Management. Here are all of my tasks out of the box. We could schedule any one of these if we wanted to. So talking about my use case where we want to copy running config to startup config again, perhaps we don't want to do this when we detect there's been a problem. Perhaps we just want to do this nightly. Perhaps we just want to ensure that every device's running config has been saved, and we want to do that every night or perhaps every weekend. Then we have a Schedules tab in Configuration Management. We can add a new schedule, copy running config to startup config. I can choose from any one of my tasks here. And then I can select a view, select a device that I want that to be run against. So in my case, it might be the Sydney router. And then I could use a new schedule. I might want it to start immediately, might want it to start on a particular date, and then I might want to have a simple recurrence of every 1 day, every 1 week, and we can implement a schedule in this manner. Okay.
And then we have one last question. Can we use this new technique to obtain more information rather than just pushing out a change?
Yeah, in fact, that leads on to a really interesting set of use cases that we anticipate this can be used for. Take, for example, a situation where you've got a network device, let's say it's a router, that suddenly has a very high CPU utilization detected on it. Now, under those circumstances, if there was a network operator diligently watching that device, you could raise the question, well, what might that operator do to further investigate? And if I had a very high utilization on a network device, it could be a server, it could be a router, whatever, then I would probably be very interested to know what processes were running and what levels of CPU each process was taking. Now, if I came back 4 hours later and realized that there had been a high CPU event, but it had gone away, so the device was now back to its normal level of utilization, there wouldn't be a lot of point in me logging into the device and asking about the processes, because the situation has been and gone, and I wouldn't learn anything new. What you could do here is automate a response to a high CPU incident, and the response could be log into the device and request a list of running processes and their respective utilizations. You would just create a new task. You'd put a login step at the beginning. You would create a new step that would simply issue the command, such as on Cisco iOS, it would be show processes, and then you'd log out. And that output from that command would be retained in the configuration management history so that you could go back in at a later date and reference the results of that and see what that device was doing at the time it was excessively busy. So that's a good example. We weren't making any changes to the device. All we were doing was requesting additional information to help with follow-on fault finding.
Okay, thanks, JD. And we just got a couple of more questions that came in. How would you identify the changes in configurations between a current and previous config backup?
Okay. Matt, do you want to show on the live system doing a comparison between two versions of, for example, the running configuration? So we're not comparing running against startup at this point. We're actually comparing a new version of the running against the old version of the running. Okay, do you want to talk us through it?
The unsaved configure. Oh, I'm sorry, I was on mute, JD. Okay, so let's consider this in an automated fashion. So where we would receive a an unsaved configuration change event, like I did at 11:55 yesterday, and again, I'll just remind you, if I compare the running and startup at that time, we receive two configurations. My running is different to my startup. At that point, Entuity would have identified that there has been an unsaved configuration change. When we then pull in the new configuration, and this is automatic because of the way that I've implemented my copy running to startup in the form of an incident trigger, when we pull in that new configuration, Entuity would have raised an alert to tell you that there's been a configuration change, and that's automatic again. So at 11:59, we would have pulled in the configuration. We would raise an alert to tell you that there's been a configuration change. We would also close the alert that told you that there was an unsaved configuration change because that's now been resolved. If you want to look at the change in configuration, you can come onto this configuration tab. I'm holding Control to select two different versions of configuration. So I have both of these highlighted now. And now I can compare the running configurations at 11:55 to the running configuration at 11:59.
And note those options will only appear in the context menu if you've got exactly two different configurations selected. If you've got none, or one, or three, it won't appear. You've got to have exactly two configuration entries selected. They don't have to be adjacent, but you just got to have two selected, and then you'll get that context menu available.
That's right. I could compare that configuration at this time to the configuration down here if I wanted to, and then choose from running or the startup. So my startup here is pretty much identical. If I compare both of these startups, we would expect to see a difference because I didn't have that community string saved at 11:55 to the startup.
Okay, thank you, Matt.
Okay, and then one other question. If I just want to give me an alert if there are startup and running configuration changes, do I have to have the configuration management module on, or do I need to set the event to as well?
In order to detect changes in configuration and perform the uploads and the comparisons and everything that we've been showing you about monitoring configurations, you do need to have the configuration management module enabled and configured to work. A critical aspect is that it is dependent upon command line access into the devices. So the command line credentials need to be provided in the inventory page as of 16.5. Along with the SNMP credentials, you've got the ability to set up the command line credentials. All of that must be configured in order that the system knows how to log in, request that the configurations be pushed back up to the Entuity server so that it can then examine them and report upon differences and policy violations.
Okay, thank you. And then a question relative to what we were talking about previously. How would you identify, highlight configuration changes between a current and a previous config backup? Can you do that in an automated fashion?
The event itself and the incident doesn't contain the information about what has changed, because frankly that change could be substantial, way bigger than you'd want to put into the information fields, the detail fields for the incident itself. However, the incident, from there, you should be able to, via a context menu on it, request an analysis in a similar way to what Matt has just shown you, that would explain what the differences were between the versions.
Okay.
That's right, and I'm showing on the screen at the moment the two incidents that will raise automatically. You have the running configuration change and the startup configuration change incident. So that would raise automatically. You can then delve into to have a look at that, right, and what exactly has changed.
Do you want to just show that incident in the incident viewer, Matt?
Let me see.
If you have it available?
I'm not 100% sure. I have a historic one, yes, from...
Okay, and if you right-click that one,
I then have the option to look at the startup versus the previous.
Yep. Here we go. Straight in, so it's easy to get to. You don't have to go finding it on some other menu. It's just a right-click on the incident. Okay, Pat, do we have anything else?
I think that's it.
I do see one that popped up here on my screen about the YouTube channel for Entuity. That's actually available via the Entuity.com homepage, is it not?
And we also include the link for this presentation in an email as a follow-up. So with that link, you can jump around and see what other Tech Talks that are available.
Great. Well, thank you very much for that. And just an additional thing, if I could just have control back, Matt, we have an email address specifically set up for Tech Talks. It is tech.talks@entuity.com. And we are really keen not only to hear your questions, but also your suggestions as to what future topics would be of particular interest to you. We want to present what you want to listen to, so please keep those ideas coming. Now, a quick reminder, in case you haven't signed up yet, that the Entuity Training Center is available for your information and reference. This is a free service, there's no charge, and you can obtain an account via the Entuity.com website, so you can get to the portal to get that form for sign up in there. The login area is in the top banner of our homepage. Now let's have a chat about the future. We have an upcoming webinar event. It's a joint webinar between BMC, Entuity, and one of our key customers, Principal Financial. The webinar will cover the new Entuity and BMC TrueSight presentation server integrated dashboard, and also SurePath, which is a key capability of Entuity. You might find the content of interest, as the dashboard integration will be discussed by the BMC IT team. Now that's the team internal to BMC, who look after the management of their entire global internal IT infrastructure. And they use a raft of BMC tools and Entuity heavily integrated with multiple of those tools to achieve that. And so this is real-world use of Entuity in a BMC integrated environment, and they're going to talk about how they're using it and the results they're getting. The SurePath segment will cover a few real-world production customer use cases, and those are currently being used by Principal Financial. Really interesting thoughts there. Definitely worth catching that webinar. So keep an eye out for the invitation to attend it, and that's going to be coming to your inbox. The next Tech Talk is scheduled for September the 27th. Finally, to wrap up, as Pat mentioned earlier, we will be sending you a video link of today's presentation for your use. Do feel free to share it with your colleagues as well. If you have any questions about today's content or would like a personal demonstration, be sure to contact your Entuity system engineer. So with that, I'd like to thank you all for attending today, and we hope to see you on July the 19th. Have a great rest of the week.